And welcome back to another episode of Miyazaki and Me. I'm Kyle.
And I am Shane.
So this episode we are going over our second film in the series. Is we are still technically not at Studio Ghibli yet, but we are definitely getting closer, and that is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind.
We're sort of at Studio Ghibli with this one. Like, most people consider this Ghibli to the point where HBO Max, which only has the Studio Ghibli films, has this one.
Yes, because it's really the first real collaboration between all three of the Studio Ghibli founders.
Yes.
Because as the history of it goes, the Castle of Cagliostro, which was our last film, very much impressed Suzuki, who was one of the three founders, and he started more regularly talking to Miyazaki and convinced Miyazaki to actually pitch an idea to Animage's. So Suzuki was working for Animage at this point in time, and Animage's publisher, or Tacoma Shoten, was looking to get into making films. Because magazine publishing, especially in the '80s, was a big market share, and he had plenty, but he wanted to kind of diversify. So Suzuki pitched the idea of like, oh, let's start doing movies, and then had Miyazaki pitch an idea, and the original story they basically said would not be commercially viable because it wasn't based off a manga or based off some other series. So Suzuki was one of the ones who decided, well, we own a magazine. Why don't we take this story and publish it in the Animage magazine to help gain traction and hopefully eventually make the movie? And this was 1979. So for four and a half, 5 years, they published Nausicaa as a manga series through the pages of Animage. And through that, it became commercially viable. So then Shoten wanted to produce the movie and started moving forward with Miyazaki.
They actually, it was more than just 4 or 5 years of before they made the movie, maybe. But the original run of the Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind manga actually went from February of 1982 to March of 1994. He wasn't anywhere near close finishing the manga when the movie came out, which caused for him to uh, maybe go a little faster on this story than he might have liked. But I mean, you would think that him being a writer of movies, he was okay with that. But it felt like he something that I'll mention later on. It did feel like he set up this giant epic with so many different pieces and parts, and then kind of crammed them all together to form the 2 hour movie.
Yep.
Not that the 2 hour movie is bad by any means. I think Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is a very, very good movie. It just felt like there were so many different. Like, I'm going to read the manga now. Let's just
Yeah,
say,
that makes
because
sense.
there's just so many pieces to me that are missing in this story. It felt like they jumped forward with relationships and with um, story beats and a lot of different things without completely earning them, because I think that there's going to be a lot more in the manga and how it gets built than there is in this movie. This should have been a series, in my opinion.
Yep. And then one of the other things, so Suzuki, even though he was one of the founders of Studio Ghibli, would not be on as a producer on this film. And so in his stead, in instead of Suzuki being the hands-on producer to kind of keep Miyazaki on schedule, they decided to reach out to one of Miyazaki's former mentors and collaborators, and that was Isao Takahata. And he'd oversee the project, and he would actually be the one who brought in the final piece and kind of the pivotal piece of Studio Ghibli in a lot of aspects. And he's the one who brought in composer Joe Hisayasha, who would then go on to work on every Miyazaki movie from then on out. And ironically, even though Takada was the one who brought Hisayashi in, the two of them would never work together until Takahata's last film.
Oh, really? I did not know that. Well, the nice thing that, having Isao Takahata involved, the coming together of all three of these, well, four now with the music,
Yeah.
with Joe Hisaishi, you just have somebody that's in every aspect that's already kind of proven.
Yes.
You've got Takahata as the director that's already done a decent number of works at this point. I think there's 4 or 5 movies under his belt at this point, and a few of them, like Horace, being very well regarded. Miyazaki, who was more of an up and comer, which is kind of weird to say about Miyazaki, being in 2020, but at this time he was an up and comer, writer as well as director of a lot of shows. And then you've got Toshio Suzuki as the producer, who obviously brings in the money, who gets things moving as a producer, and so it's just the perfect mix and to create this studio, and this is the movie that kind of starts to bring it together.
Yep. So that's kind of your little background segment of the film itself. So let's give some context to what else was going on around this time period. So Nausicaa was released in 1984. It had a budget of $1.7 million converted from yen, and it ended up making $13 million in the Japanese box office and $1.7 million overseas. So they broke even just through the overseas box office, which is a really interesting thing when you think about that. And some
overseas is not where a lot of animes make their money. It's very rare for that situation to happen.
No, and that's like I said, that's the weird thing of like, just if you look, they broke even just with the overseas, and then made kind of the capital that would launch Studio Ghibli from the Japanese box office. But other films that were coming out around this time, this was a year in our Disney timeline. This was a year right before The Black Cauldron, and there weren't really as many interesting films that came out. Not as many that I knew about, and not as many that drew my attention. But there were a few TV series that were very interesting when you compare them to the time. And actually, Miyazaki was at this same time working on being the director of a TV series called Sherlock Hound, which we talked about a little bit in the last episode, that the producers of The Great Mouse Detective admitted making a lovely homage to Castle of Cagliostro with the end of The Great Mouse Detective. And I'm sure they also took many elements, lovingly, of course, from Sherlock Hound.
Well, that one ties in pretty directly.
Yes. It's like, oh, it's a mouse instead of a a dog, but pretty close. This was also the start of the Muppet Babies series. Was in 1984.
Muppet Babies. Okay.
Yep. There was the season 8 of the Super Friends was also this year. Scooby Doo Mysteries was another Scrappy Doo season. But the really fun ones is this was the start of the Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends series, which is listed in the category. Yep.
The stop motion claymation
Yes.
style. Yeah.
This was also the start of the Heathcliff series.
The not Garfield Orange Cat.
Yes, not Garfield, but Heathcliff. Yes. This was also the start of Lupin the Third Part 3. So the third series of Lupin, TV shows. And then we also got our big metal robots in multiple forms, as 1984 was the start of not only Transformers, but also Voltron.
Awesome. 2 shows that I knew very well back when I was a kid.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's our animation timeline.
I do think it's worth mentioning that 2 years before this, a movie called The Last Unicorn came out, and the reason why I think that's worth mentioning is that Topcraft, who actually animated this film, also animated Last Unicorn. So they are going to be known by people for multiple things outside of this. I mean, they were also involved in a lot of Lupin, Sherlock Hound, as well. But the kind of odd thing, though, is that Topcraft, this is one of their last films.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they didn't. Their last actual work is listed as 1985. But yeah, this Nausicaa is one of the final films that they did as a full company, because they ended up breaking up as a company.
I almost wonder we'll have to look at some of those names from Topcraft as we move into Castle in the Sky and beyond, and see how many of those names end up going and moving to Studio Ghibli proper as we go forward.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I was just about to say why they went out. They went bankrupt, but they were purchased out by Miyazaki, Suzuki, and Takahata.
There we go. Everything happens for a reason there. That's cool. Like I'm glad at least the animators that were working for Top Flight or Top
Yeah,
Craft.
essentially what happened is that they had to lay off a lot of the animation staff when they purchased it. A lot of that staff went to Rankin and Bass to work on television shows like Thundercats. But eventually, most of that staff was actually brought back once Walt Disney came into the fold for Ghibli.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, let's get into Nausicaa itself, and you can tell already from everything that happens, even from the opening scenes, that the background animation is kind of crisper. The actual animation itself is crisper, or the music obviously is a lot better, or at least fits a lot better right away.
We're talking about in comparison to Cagliostro.
Yeah, in comparison to Cagliostro, yes.
Very much so. I agree with that. This, and it's weird to say this, the background. So the background animation in Lupin it very much felt hand drawn and all that. This also feels hand drawn, but it feels more like a painting rather than a drawing.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's more painterly, and like you get that. That's why the separation happens more with the characters, and it kind of makes each of the characters strike out a little bit more in the fact that you have so much separation, because it's not a totally different style, but you can sense it a little bit more, and it also works really well. Oh, if you know photography stuff, like I'm a photographer outside of all these podcasts and videos that I do, and you do get this kind of surrealistic effect when you have, a a like longer or a longer lens, and it's like an 85 millimeter or more, and you get that super shallow depth of field, and then your background and looks kind of yeah, very surreal and almost painted, and that's kind of the similar effect to what they're going with here. So
Yeah, especially at the beginning of the movie, the the kind of the painted on backgrounds, as we were discussing it, are very very prominent early on, and they disappear a little bit throughout. It's almost like they were maybe trying to save time or money at different times, but there's a lot of desert landscapes
yeah,
and just cloud landscape, cloud backgrounds, things like that happened later on. But when they do put you in that the forest, or near a river, or whenever they're in a spot that is has nice scenery, the scenery is beautiful. Like
yep,
it's very well set. But it's one of those things that it I think if it was a later on, like an actual Ghibli proper movie, that we might have seen a little bit more of that background, of that of everything that you see in points of the movie throughout, rather than just a couple times.
yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, the foreground and background elements like definitely stand out. Oh, and like, yeah, like you said, you can already see a little bit of the difference that's making that all of these guys having their style moving forward. And yeah, we are introduced at first to Lord Yuma, the sword master. Even though we only get to see him really do anything with the sword in like one scene later on.
He does a couple things to kind of hint that he has some sword prowess, but yeah, Lord Yupa doesn't really do a whole lot with the sword. But you get the one of the better lines of the movie once he starts doing something with swords.
That's true. Yeah. So like Lord Yupa is exploring this desert landscape. We get the narration that it was 1,000 years ago. Oh, the what they end up calling the 7 days of fire. These monstrous creatures kind of destroyed all of the world, and this poisonous jungle has happened ever since. And then we get to finally meet our lead character, and we get to finally meet Nausicaa.
The titular Nausicaa, floating through the air, doing what she needs.
Yep, floating through the air on a glider that is so cool. The glider ends up kind of being a character into itself, and apparently it's a real thing now in some aspects. Like, they've tried to make a real version of it in the real world. It's not as cool as this one, but so what were your initial thoughts on Nausicaa as a character?
She feels like an early model to characters that Miyazaki really delves into later on. Once again, just like when it comes to the background of this, and she's. I'm not saying that she's not one dimensional. She for sure isn't one dimensional, but she just feels like she's the tip of the iceberg. And I honestly think that just has to do with the formats. This is another time where I'm going to go out and say that I really just wanted this to be more. I wanted there needed to be a background episode about her and her father, her and Lord Yupa. There needed to be background episode of a little bit more with the 7 days of hell. Um, uh, they set up everything is set up correctly to do what this movie needs to do. I just think that this movie wasn't enough to tell this full story in the
Yeah.
proper way.
Yeah, I can see that. I do like that. Like you get to see her personality right away, though, in her going around, and you see how inventive she is already, in finding the ohm shell, and then not being able to break through it with like the cubic zirconium sword, and then doing that trick with the gunpowder,
Yep, and then
which was so cool and like so interesting. Of like, oh, I would have never thought of that. And it's like, okay, make a circle around the ohm eye with the gunpowder, click the flint of the gun, and then boom, okay, now I can chip away and get this shell as I need it. So that was cool.
yeah, and it was a really cool introduction series of scenes with her here, where she's walking through the forest and she's putting plants in little pieces of plants in vials and examining things, and she gets this, and right after she uses the gunpowder to break the ohms, well, it's an eye socket out.
Yeah.
She then sees that it's the spores are coming, and so she lays down and puts it over her head so she can see out of it, and like looks at all of it around and talks about how beautiful it is. And it's a really nice, beautiful scene.
It's like this nice snowfall effect, that you don't get to see that often. So yeah, I really liked that. And then as she's calmly going through, and all this stuff, all the spores are coming down, she hears a faint like gunshot in the distance, or it's a gunshot or a roar or something, but something awakens her, and she goes to investigate and realizes that it's actually, well, she doesn't know it's Lord Yupa yet, but it's Lord Yupa under attack from an ohm. Shoots the flare to direct Lord Yuma, her direction as opposed to back into the jungle, and then rescues Lord Yuma.
Yeah, she drops some flashbangs which shock the creature, and then she's able to calm it and get it to go back. Then she has a nice moment with Lord Yupa where she lets him know that she's been doing something that everyone else doesn't know, and she wants to show him later.
Yeah.
And she asks him to take the piece of the piece of the ohm back, because it's hard to fly with it, and he puts it on his spare horse claw, not chocobo. It is a horse claw.
Yes.
Although they were the inspiration for chocobos. The creator of the Final Fantasy game did say that he essentially stole the chocobo idea from seeing the creature in Nausicaa. So fun little fact there.
Yeah, like the first time I saw this movie, I hadn't played any of the Final Fantasy games. Well, I still haven't, but I've seen you play it enough.
I played all of them.
Yeah, you played
except
all
for
of
11
them.
and 14. I haven't played 11 or 14. Those are the
Still,
online ones.
like so like I didn't know what a chocobo was, so I'm just like thinking it's like, oh, this is a weird, like horse bird creature. And then as soon as I watched it recently, I'm just like, is that a chocobo? What? And then realizing the timeline of like, okay, that's not a chocobo, but there's definitely some similarities here. And Lord Yuma, and even he points out in his very gruff English ways, because Lord Yuma is voiced by Patrick Stewart, of like, oh, she just turned that back with only a few flash grenades and an insect charm. Yes, that was my attempt at a Patrick Stewart, and I apologize.
It was beautiful. It brought tears to my eye.
But like the fact that, like, Nausicaa doesn't want to kill the Ohms. Like she wanted to just lure it away. And then we get that also Nausicaa going full Disney princess. Just wild creatures just love her. And we get Kata, the little fox squirrel that definitely is not Jolteon.
Sorry, what did you call it?
It's
Is it Teto?
it's a fox squirrel.
No, but isn't the name of it Teto?
It's Teto. Okay, I thought it was Kato.
I think it's Teto.
That makes sense too. But yeah, her little fox squirrel that definitely isn't Jolteon from Pokemon, but I mean it's Jolteon from Pokemon.
Another situation too where it's a very fast bond of she just lets it bite her, and then doesn't get mad or anything, and then they instantly bond, and that's fine. There could have been more. There should have been more.
Yeah.
But they just don't have the time. But she uses this as well with this conversation with Lord Yupa to discuss. Like she brings up her father, and her father's sick.
Well, she brings up the fact that the valley seems to be kind of immune from the spores.
Yes.
Because of the fact that the wind just blows through, and it's enough that we've got, because it's basically this blockade of trees, and then that's enough to block the wind from entering the valley itself. So then we get back to the valley and are introduced to her father and Obaba, the gruff, blind old sage, who is a very fun character.
Yeah, she's this trope that you get in a lot of Miyazaki films, so you'll get used to the Obaba character of the older woman sage that helps out, but every now and then she seems kind of off and not quite with it. If you want a nice kind of comparison, think of the grandmother from Moana. It's that style of character.
Yes.
And Miyazaki loves putting them in there. And sometimes, and depending on it, which film it is, the character sways in alignment when it comes to whether they're good or bad or somewhere in the middle. But Miyazaki always has one in.
Yeah, it's similar to the older lady in Spirited Away and that style. Yep.
But Obaba then brings up they have a what's that called?
A tapestry.
A quilt? Yeah, a tapestry.
Yeah.
That speaks of a hero to come to save them, wearing blue on a golden sea, that will bring together the humanity and the jungle. And yeah, it's trust me, it'll never come back up.
Yeah, it's definitely not like this entire time so far Nausicaa has been wearing nothing but blue.
Yeah. Until this scene, actually. This very scene is when she changes out of it while they're discussing it.
Yeah, she changes out of it to her more casual thing. And then they go outside, and there's a giant airship crashing. And this was one of the cool, this was one of the first, even though we got all the glider scenes and stuff before this, but this was, get used to seeing Miyazaki air battles, because you're going to see them throughout this series, that's for sure.
Yep, and you get some really cool visuals on this where Nausicaa jumps onto her glider and she's trying to help the airship and try to get it to glide down and land. Unfortunately, she's unsuccessful and it crashes. And she meets with Princess Listel to hear Listel's final breaths as everything is on fire, where Listel tells her to destroy the cargo before she dies. She doesn't really mention what the cargo is. She just says, you have to destroy the cargo.
Yeah, and Lestelle's kind of the princess of uh, Pidgeot or Pidgeot, um, and
PJ.
yeah, and the Tolmekians are the ones that are hit her that have her captured, and so they kind of become the antagonist. One of the antagonists for the rest of the films is these Tomekians, as we'll see.
But after this one, an insect emerges from the wreckage that they had, and Nausicaa calms it down and guides it away from the village, just kind of really showing off that she is for peace with the insects, that she doesn't want to cause any trouble.
Yeah, as there's guards from the valley that just want to shoot it, and then they're talking about, oh, you're never gonna pierce their, or you're never gonna pierce their armor with just one bullet, that kind of stuff. So
Yep. And then as they're like trying to save the you know bury the people that were on the ship and that died, and see what's in the cargo. They find the cargo unburnt, and it looks, to me, it kind of looked like a brain. Um,
yeah,
I read that it's an embryo. Is that what they're kind of going for? But
okay,
but
yeah. So it's a growing, yeah, it's growing into this creature.
exactly. And the as they find that, Tomokian Tomokian troops, led by their princess, Kashana, come into the valley. They bring in their airships, and they crash through a windmill on the way down. Like they are uh, very much in war mode, and immediately they go to the main housing structure where Nausicaa's father is at, and they kill him.
Yeah,
They shoot him.
they just straight up like walk in and just shoot him, which is so weird because they, everything else throughout the rest of the movie is, a few little, jabs and sword fights and stuff, and this one it's like, yeah, no, we're just gonna go in and shoot him. It's like,
Yep.
wait, hold it, really?
And Nausicaa gets there right after they shoot him, and she goes nuts and starts to kill the Tomekians. It's the only time that you see her like really break down and do anything that's really actually violent. And before she's able to go much further or get herself hurt, Lord Yupa comes in, and he takes her sword to his arm and puts his knife to the neck of a swordsman, of a knight for the other side, for the Temekians, and pretty much says like, "Hey man, I'm gonna kill you if you try to do anything." And the guy's like, "Okay, I won't." And the princess comes in, and this is the part that kills me, is that she just straight up says, "Oh no, we're not here to hurt anybody. We're here to talk." And it was like, well, the first thing you did was kill the king, so don't know how the far that's gonna go here with the whole talking thing.
The whole, her coming in and just like, no, we came in and we're just gonna talk about a peaceful solution to this. And it's like, you just killed their leader.
And this is where you start to get a little bit more exposition. This is where you find out that embryo is actually going to grow into one of the giant warriors, uh, the 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 giant bioweapon that caused the 7 days of fire.
Yep. Yeah, and we get a nice like animated kind of flashback that we see in the opening credits. It's but then of the soldiers, the big, like god warriors stepping through and burning everything. But then we also see, because it's Yuma and Mito that are talking, and they're just talking about the fact that most of those creatures kind of petrified, and their corpses were just laid about through the deserts, but apparently there was one that went far underneath the earth and was still alive, and this is the one that the Tomekians had found.
So this is when Kushana, the princess, lets them know that their plan is to use this against the Pejites to defeat them. That they had to get to it before the Pejites get to it, and it's all about the war between these two nations and how they hate each other. And so with this, Kashana says that we can't move the embryo, but we're going to take some hostages back and leave some people here to watch it, so that we know that it's safe. And one of the hostages will be Nausicaa.
Yep. Yeah, one of the hostages was Nausicaa, and then later on, like, you find out that Mito also volunteered to be a hostage so that he could go over and watch Nausicaa.
Yep, they said who wants to be a hostage, and he said, so say we all. And then the other three people that are hostages are these three old guys that are just kind of comic relief a bit.
Yeah, they're like slight comic relief, slight Shakespearean chorus at points, and it's great. It's a good combo. I'm sure that's another trope that will definitely be seen, and character archetype that we will see a lot in Miyazaki films moving forward.
And then this is when they take off in the giant airships that the Tomekians brought, is when you find out that the Tomekians are terrible at making airships.
They basically made Ford Pintos as airships, as we discovered, because they get into an aerial battle, which the animation for the aerial battle is gorgeous. Like, it's so good. And we get the aerial battle, and yeah, it's like one or two shots, and these Tolmekian and crafts just blow up.
And it's just this tiny fighter ship. And the fighter ship comes up, and it's like shy a surprise, and takes out all of the airships, all of the giant airships. No, they don't hold up any type of fight. And then the one tiny airship, which I assume was supposed to be the fighter protector of it, does end up shooting down the tiny airship, but only after he is distracted by the fact that when Nausicaa gets up on the roof of the airship, and yells him to stop, he has an image of the Princess Lestel from earlier that yelling the same thing, and he gets surprised and pulls up, and that's when he is shot down. But yeah, there's just one tiny ship shot them all down. Now with this, they were dragging a cargo plane from the Valley of the Wind, and that had the three old men that are the chorus type that we were talking about. And inside of and that got separated, so it was not actually shot down. And then as the ships were going down, they Nausicaa, Mito, and then they also bring Princess Kushana with them, get into their own fighter ship, which why it wasn't being used to try to battle this other one, who knows? But they get into their own one to escape the wreckage and to try to find the cargo ship to bring them back.
So yeah, they go through the cargo ship. Nausicaa ends up eventually finding, and why we made the Shia surprise is this character is voiced by Shia LaBeouf. And no one's trying to kill him at this point, so you have not killed Shia LaBeouf yet.
No. If you have not listened to the Rob Cantor Shia LaBeouf song, then you should.
You really should. And at this point, he was still famous. What's his character name again, Cheyne?
Asbel.
Yeah, Asbel. So yeah, Asbel, and yeah, like we said, he's sees the vision of his sister. Yeah, it's either his sister or like the like I saw it and interpreted it as the eventual, like, he almost got a premonition of the the the
Sure.
blue prophecy, version of Nausicaa, before anyone else did.
You see, I think so this is gonna, it doesn't really spoil anything for later, but bringing up something that happens later, I think that it's his sister because it ties into the fact that later on, another soldier from Pajit was going to shoot her, and then she was standing up doing the arms across as well, and he says, "I can't." That's Princess Lestel.
Ah, okay, okay. I see where you're coming from there. All right. But yeah, she eventually finds him as he's like trying to like shoot his way through the jungle. Which this is definitely one of the characterizations that definitely needed more time, because he, is full on going through and, shooting his way through this jungle. Then he, through a few interactions with Nausicaa, is super peace loving, just like she is.
Yeah, it's very much. It also, I mean, I get that she doesn't want anyone to die, so she wants to help everyone, but she warms up to him very quickly when he literally just murdered 4 ships worth of people and also a bunch of the insects, and yeah, it's just something that needed some growth.
Yeah, I think very, very much so. But I realize the scene we skipped over, that kind of is important, and we can talk about it when we talk about this next scene, is Nausicaa. We see her collecting all of those spores earlier on in the movie. She's actually been planting the spores in this underground cavern beneath the castle in the valley. And Yuma comes through and Yupa comes through and sees that she's doing that, and is like, "Oh, all of these are lethal, and these are all poisonous, but the air down here seems, pure. What's going on?" And then she talked about the fact that this was all planted from, the water got churned by the windmill, and so did the ground soil, and that kind of purified it. And she was able to, use that to plant and all of these plants, and pot them, and keep them alive. And it was,
And she was doing that to find a cure for her father's illness.
yeah, yeah, and she was doing that, yeah, for, noble reasons of like, oh yes, we're gonna find this cure for her father. So but the reason I bring that up at this point is her and Asbel go through and kind of fall through quicksand, and you're thinking, oh great, this is halfway through the movie, our main character just died. But nope, they fell through to kind of an underneath part of the jungle that was completely purified. And, all the air and the plants were all purified because of, like, the petrified trees that it all melted and faded down on, and becoming this sand was actually enough to kind of purify the toxic jungle.
Yeah, and so they learn this, and they pick up on the hints pretty quick. Once again, better as a series. That's what's going on. But they had lost their masks on the way down, so they were very shocked that they could breathe in.
Yeah.
So after this, they decide to go back to Pejite.
And we should mention, because this is one of the scenes I actually really liked. As they're falling, Nausicaa has a flashback, in a like dream sequence of her actually protecting a baby Ohm.
Oh yes, yep.
And she's like, oh, like, as all of the villagers from the valley are trying to get after this thing, and she's the one protecting it, and it's in this beautiful, like, kind of more watercolor and pencil sketch style that I really liked.
Yeah, they do a really good job of showing that this is either a flashback or a dream sequence or a mixture of the two. Just from the art style, just from the way that you can tell that this is part of her memory. And I think that's really, really well done. And it also kind of puts in the inherent hate of these insect creatures, while it's showing a kid that has befriended one. So it shows that they don't necessarily have to be evil, even though everyone sees them as that.
Yep.
So it is a very important scene in the movie.
Yeah. Yep. It would be a shame if someone just cut that out for some reason.
No, yeah, I guess that makes. Well, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk
Um,
about that.
so they go to back to Pejite. She brings Asbel back to Pejite, and they find it completely destroyed by insects. And this is Asbel's town, and he makes a comment while they're in there looking at this destruction, and he says, "We've gone too far. Um, this wasn't worth killing Telmekians." And she's confused by that because this was his town and he's blaming themselves. At which point, you then quickly meet. They see an airship, and you meet up with, I believe it's the mayor of Pejite, and he's excited. He's happy about what happened here, and this is where you find out that it's actually the Pejite. So they were fighting with the Tolmekians, and as a offensive measure, the Pejites uh, lured some of the Ohms to the city to attack the Tolmekians and the city itself. And so they were using the Ohms as a weapon.
Yeah, and we don't know how they're using it yet, but you can already tell that this isn't a cool idea. Like, this is bad. Like, whatever they did has to be really dastardly. Um and it is. It's really messed up what they how they use these ohms.
Yeah, they mention that they know that Tolmekians are in the Valley of the Wind right now, and they know that's where the embryo is as well. And so they're going to do the same thing to the Valley of the Wind, which obviously Nausicaa does not like,
Yeah,
as
Nausicaa's like
anyone.
definitely not cool with that. Yeah.
And she is then taken prisoner by them. So she's taken prisoner up in the airship. All while this is happening, we then move back over to the back over to Mito, Princess Kushuno, and then that Greek chorus of old men. I like
Yep.
calling them the Greek chorus of
Yeah.
old men, so I'm going to continue that. So what they had actually split from Nausicaa to go back to the Valley of the Wind. Back when
Yeah,
she
yeah,
was
because
searching for Asbel.
as she was searching for Asbel, she's like, if I'm not back in an hour, leave. And they're like, okay, we're definitely. And then, like, you keep every single time, and you cut to them later. It's like, well, it's been a couple hours. I guess we better actually leave now. And like they're still kind of searching for her, like, even though we're told to go straight back.
Yeah, and once they get back, that they mention that they are mad that they didn't wait.
Yeah.
They're upset with themselves for leaving, but they have Princess Kashuna prisoner. You find out now that the city had found a spore that grew and infected a tree in the forest. So the villagers who were all their guns were taken away
By the Tomakians, yeah.
by the Tomekians. They are now rallying to try to essentially burn down the forest that's been keeping them safe, because the spores had actually, what they do is that they grow and they expand, and so all these trees are being hit by these spores, and they now have to burn them all down because they don't know that once the spores petrify that it could purify. So they are working on this, and I don't remember how Kashana gets away from them. Do you?
She just kind of gets away from them. Like,
I don't
there's
think they
really
do
not.
anything.
Yeah, there's not really. I think it's the fact that Mito takes off, and the Greek chorus just kind of ignore her, and then she just goes back to Prince Humperdinck.
Yeah, I was about to say the next thing I know, she's talking to Prince Humperdinck, who literally makes a deadpan to the camera. Well, that dream didn't last long when he sees her alive.
Yeah,
And we're calling him Prince Humperdinck because it is Prince Humperdinck, voiced by Chris Sarandon from Princess Bride.
yeah,
So they decide that they are going to take control back from the Valley of the Wind. So they are the Valley of the Wind after they were setting fire to the forest. They then started fighting back against the Tolmekians, including they took one of their tanks. And so now there's fighting amongst each other, and essentially the Tolmekians drive them back into this. They call it ancient vehicle, where they said that even could have gone to the moon, alluding that there was a lot of technology in the past. So they're driven back into that. At this point, they decide that they have to wait for Nausicaa, and now we kind of jump back over to Nausicaa on the airship.
yeah. Nausicaa is a prisoner on this airship until Asbel's mother comes to visit her with, I thought it was his like maybe a younger sister because the other is his twin, but like
It's just a girl. Some
yeah,
girl, I think.
it's just another girl, and they switch places. Of course, Tedo comes with Nausicaa, and they escape. They've got to go through and find her glider as kind of everything is starting to kind of wreak havoc. This other airship from Tomekia comes over, and like they start fighting in the air. So it's another awesome air battle. You find out that Yupa is on the other ship, and that leads to probably my favorite line. And I really hope that this line was actually, a direct translation, because Yupa storms through the top of this plane or this aircraft as all these Pegite soldiers are fighting, and then they look and it's like, that's Lord Yupa, kill him and you'll be famous.
Yep, and Yupa just pretty much mows them all down.
He murders everyone.
So Lord Yupa wasn't just on the ship. What had happened was that when we had mentioned that Mito had gone away, Mito flew Yupa there to help Nausicaa escape and dropped him onto the ship.
Yes.
Nausicaa is now escaping on her glider, but the ship, for some reason, it drops some of the people onto the Pedite ship because the Pegites make much sturdier ships than
Yes.
the Tolmekians do. They can take some bullets on those ones. They drop some people onto the Pegite ship and pursue Nausicaa, and that's when Yupa gets dropped off on there to start attacking them, to try to kind of to help Nausicaa get away.
Yeah.
And this is when Nausicaa Nausicaa is now leaving with Mito to search for the Pegites who are leading the insects to the Valley of the Wind.
Yeah. And then
this is
Mito has to go back and join the fight, leaving Nausicaa to find the like, it was almost a reverse like hot air balloon kind of thing that was leading these insects.
It's kind of like if you ever played Super Mario Brothers, it's the clown thing that Bowser rides in.
Yeah,
is
like
what
that's
they're riding in.
Yeah. But the problem is, and the gross thing that happens is what is below this Pegite airship is a baby ohm that they're using as the bait to lure all of these ohms towards the valley, which is just a disgusting move.
Yep, it's been stabbed in multiple places, and to carry it, they had literally just stabbed into its side, and then it was linked up to the ship, and they were bringing it, which was causing a stampede, like a huge stampede of murderous ohms, because you can tell when they become murderous because their eyes get red.
Yeah, their eyes get red with rage. So yeah, we see just a red field at first, almost, of because Nausicaa just sees the red eyes and goes towards it, and then she eventually crashes the Bowser mobile, and the baby ohm is actually trying to get to the rest of its all the rest of its ohm kind, and
but they're crashed on an island, so they're surrounded by the acid water.
Yeah, and Nausicaa gets shot twice by the Pidgeite guards before they crash. So she's bleeding out, but she's still trying to save this ohm. And then the ohm actually drives her into the acid, and it's her scream and seeing that she's in such pain from trying to protect this ohm that makes the ohm stop. The baby ohm stop, at least.
Yeah. At which point she says we have to get over to them, and she makes them fly her over. But while she's flying over there, we jump back over to the battle that was happening before. At this point, Mito has landed with Lord Yupa. They inform the sides that there's no time to be fighting each other because of these insects coming along. They're trying to fight the insect, or to fire at the insects, but obviously bullets don't do anything. And this is when Princess Kashuna raises the giant creature, the giant warrior.
Yeah, it's end up in the translation. It's end up called like the God Warrior, in the Wikipedia article and stuff. And this is one of those fun animation tales that happen throughout this, because they were very much running out of they were running on a pretty shoestring budget. I know $1.7 million sounds like a lot, but in the film world, it's not. So they were running on a pretty shoestring budget for this, and they were, running behind schedule, and they needed another animator to do this sequence. And this guy walks in, hands Miyazaki and Takata his portfolio and some storyboards, and they're like, yeah, you've got the job. What's your name? And Cheyne, tell him who it was.
It was Hideaki Anno, who people might know as the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion. A pretty famous piece of anime there. Just recently re-released on Netflix and redubbed and remastered onto Netflix. So pretty. If you watch that scene, the God Warrior scene in Nausicaa, and then watch some scenes of the giant fights in Evangelion, there's a lot of, you can tell it's the same person.
Yeah. And he'd be like, he's a weird, like, recurring, like, he never really leaves the Studio Ghibli family, even though he starts his own studio. Like, whenever they need him, he'll come back. It's just they don't need him that often. So, because he comes back for Grave of the Fireflies as an animator, and then he actually comes back much later on as the voice of Jiro in The Wind Rises. And there's a really interesting documentary. It's called The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, that I just recently watched, and it's all about the making of The Wind Rises. And they were talking. It's like, oh, all of these actors are like emoting too much for this character. Like, we need kind of an enigmatic voice that, maybe used to be an actor but isn't really. But the thing that they keep coming back to is he's enigmatic. Like, and they're like, oh, what about Ano? And it's Suzuki and Miyazaki like talking back and forth, and you just see this realization come over Miyazaki of like, that's a really good suggestion. He's really weird. He would be really good for this, like how I'm writing this character. And he's like, yeah, he's explaining it. It's like, oh no, I thought you'd be perfect because you're this, this, and this. And even Ano's just like, I guess I'll take that as a compliment. Like, I'm glad. Like, and you can tell there's definitely a deep friendship and like a deep respect between these two. And I think it all stems from this collaboration. So, but yeah, it's such a cool scene. Like, Ano, like, I want to see some more Neon Genesis for sure. Looking after this, so
it's very much worth watching. The story, it gets a little dark. Actually, Ano talks about it gets dark because of he has a history of clinical depression. And
yes.
he uses that towards his writing in that. But to finish off, so the God Warrior pops up, and she commands it to attack the insects, which it does. It fires a shot, but the people around notice that it's falling apart. That it's not. It's sort of like disintegrating as it's moving. And and I think it's Prince Humperdinck that says we hatched it prematurely. So after the second shot, which is fired, it completely disintegrates and skull drops as Princess Kashana is fleeing.
Yeah, it's this cool like body horror kind of shot of like its face melting away and you see the skull underneath it, and yeah. So yeah, if that's more of Ano's art style, like I'm gonna be all for it.
And so at this point, this is when Nausicaa gets dropped off in front of the stampede with the baby Ohm, and they just run her over.
Yeah, they just run her over, and I'm just like, again, kind of the first time I watched this, I was like, wait a second, what? Like, you just figure it's like, oh, this is just gonna be she's gonna stop them in their tracks, and it'll all be okay. And it's like, no, that's not how it works in these movies.
Yeah, so they run her over. They start attacking everything around, but before they actually kill really anyone, honestly, their eyes start to turn blue, and like everyone looks, and they're all facing towards the middle, and they're facing towards Nausicaa lying still, bloodied and beaten, while the baby Ohm that she had saved comes up to her, and as the baby Ohm comes up to her, all the rest of the Ohms start, their tentacles, which are golden tentacles, start spouting out, and they're resuscitating her and raising her up. And her dress, which was pink earlier, is now blue. You don't really see a reason for it in the actual anime itself, but you see if you look up anything online, they say that it's because the Ohm blood is blue, and so that's what caused it to be blue. But she gets raised up and resuscitated by these by the golden tentacles, at which point she stands up and starts thanking them and starts walking forward with her blue dress, and then with Teto on her shoulder, and is just the image from that tapestry of the savior.
The savior in blue, and just on the golden field, and even Obaba is like, oh, I can see it, almost, like, she basically says,
Almost.
she's like, well, she just said she could feel it.
Yeah. I just like the idea. I can see it almost. I mean, I'm still blind, but it's sort of there.
I really thought they were going to do that and just make it a little too far. Of like, oh, and I can see. It's like, you've been blind this whole movie. Why would you, magically be able to see this? But I mean, she sees it in her mind's eye, though, because she's the one who sees the tapestry, and then we cut back to Nausicaa. But
yep. But this is the end of the movie. The actual summing everything up kind of happens in the credits in the background.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah, you can see the Pejites that were on that ship that no longer have a land kind of stay in the Valley of the Wind and help them rebuild. You can see that that Princess Kashana and the Tolmekians leave, and seem to leave the village alone. They seem to be having a little bit more of a respect for the insects, which you see when Lord Yupa and Asbel kind of go off on a what looks like a expedition, and they're just moving past insects without any kind of interaction between them. They're doing their thing, the insects are doing their own thing. Yeah. And that they kind of just, and the final image is down in that pit where they had fallen earlier, where they had lost their mask. You see Nausicaa's mask laying in the sand, in the soil, and a tree is growing from where it was.
Yeah.
A sprout of a tree is starting to grow up. So that's the very final image that you get.
Yeah.
And that's Nausicaa.
And yeah, so we go over the history of this, and before the interesting thing about this is, like, it made a lot of money in Japan. Like, the next one, Castle in the Sky, will barely make 9 million. This made 17. So it ended up, drawing a lot of attention, and unfortunately that meant that it also drew some international attention. And there was a production company called Mason International Incorporated, produced a 95-minute version of English language dub of Nausicaa that was retitled Warriors of the Wind. And they changed a lot of things. One, it's a PG movie. But they cut 22 minutes out of the film for the release, and they actually, luckily on the Wikipedia article, they actually have which scenes got deleted, and I told Cheyne to ignore this section because I wanted his genuine surprise at each of these scenes. And I'm excited for this. So the first scene that they deleted was, and just says here, Nausicaa enters the toxic jungle. Once there, she discovers a shell belonging to a dead Ohm.
No, they cut the opening scene, like
yes,
one of the most important scenes in the movie to me.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And while looking at the Ohm's eyelid, she is surrounded by spores. They cut that scene.
That's odd.
It's very odd. That one annoyed me a lot. There's a few other ones that are almost as bad, if not worse. So the next scene they deleted, after returning to the valley to the Valley of the Wind, Yupa is asked to be the godfather of a newborn girl.
Okay, that's fine.
That's fine, but like it's one of those little character moments that I liked.
I mean, it showed that he is respected and by the people that are around there. It gives him a connection to the city that he just came back to.
Yep. So the next one, because this is post the fight. When a villager finds a poisonous spore in the valley, another villager destroys it. That's when the little kid finds the one underneath.
That's kind of important to what they're to a big scene later of the spores hitting the forest, though.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But also, they would technically delete that scene. So.
The one later where there's the
Yep.
spores in the forest. All right, whatever. That's.
Next scene.
I
Yupa.
already felt like this movie was too short, and they're cutting all these scenes that are necessary.
Yep. Yupa discusses with Mito preventing the revival of the giant warrior, and they also deleted him walking down and discovering Nausicaa's secret garden.
So they have no explanation for her knowing, and okay, that's
Yep. They also cut. While sleeping, Nausicaa remembers an episode from her childhood in which she attempts to protect a baby Ohm from the village leaders.
yeah. You had mentioned that earlier. That still shocks me that they cut that, but
Yeah.
I sort of get that one, but it just does it's character growth.
Yep. They also cut as there's thunder in the background now. Even Mother Nature is ticked about all of these changes that are made. Apparently, Nausicaa and Asbel visiting this one is just cut partially, but they cut down the portions of them visiting the non-lethal part of the jungle underground.
Okay. So they just shorten that scene.
Yes. They also cut Nausicaa arguing with the mayor of Pejite about the plan for the giant warrior.
What excuse do they have for being locked up on the plane then?
I don't know. And then there's a couple more scenes, but the reason that this is so kind of an amazing story is Studio Ghibli would have a very strict, when they do the English releases, nothing is altered policy moving forward because of this experience. But the best one, so it was pre Disney getting a hold of of all the Studio Ghibli movies, because at least it seemed like Disney they could trust. The first people who helped distribute stuff for them in the United States was actually Miramax. So Harvey Weinstein, who is notorious for buying up movies and then cutting them, got the rights to Princess Mononoke. Oh, don't worry. This is the best, most badass Studio Ghibli story I've ever heard. Toshio Suzuki sent Harvey Weinstein a katana and had a note written on it and with it that just simply said "no cuts."
That's great.
And it's great. I love that Studio Ghibli, of all people, are the people that are bullying Harvey Weinstein into yeah, no, you're not messing with our movie at all. And just that sign of sending him a katana and just saying no cuts whatsoever. It's so good.
I'm glad that they cared that much about the English, about the different language releases.
Yeah, and you can see that, like, it seems like they always hire people who are pretty stringent on the translation. Like, they'll keep as faithful as they possibly can.
Hmm.
You know, it'll be a little different here and there, or different turns of phrases, that kind of stuff, of just to make it flow and fit with the animation better. But it definitely, especially with the Miyazaki films, because the dialogue is so limited, it makes more sense that, you know, they don't change as much. So
Yeah, and then I mean, the reception of this movie in Japan, in particular, this movie is considered one of the best animated films of all time in Japan.
yep.
And now, might not be as high on the list for Americans, but as recently as 2006, um, they at the Japan Media Arts Festival, where there was 80,000 people in attendance. This was the highest ranked film for greatest
Oh,
animation.
cool.
So there's this is a very much loved movie, and it's very obviously influential by the fact that it, arguably is the career starter of Ghibli. So,
Yep. Yeah, it's a career start, you know, start of Ghibli. It's, you know, the first like mainstream exposure of Hideki Anno. You know, that's kind of where he finds his voice. Because this story, like, I think they tell about that story in On Homage later on, of because the ad, you know, got put in On Homage that they were seeking in artists, and, you know, I think they end up making an article later on about Hideki Anno. So that's kind of his rise to prominence, of like, hey, there's this really talented animator that came in to help us. You know, you should, you know, check him out. And then, of course, you get Takahata as the producer, and, you know, this is another Miyazaki just masterpiece, you know, that people saw. So they were very excited for what they would do moving forward.
uh, yeah, and then moving forward,
Plus we actually get a real life glider out of, like, based off this movie that technically Studio Ghibli wanted to endorse, apparently, but the makers of the glider told them, no, you can't endorse it, because if something goes wrong, we don't want you to get blamed for a crash.
that's funny. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so this is the catapult of Ghibli. Final thoughts on Nausicaa?
I really liked it, especially, you know, like I said, I watched it the first time probably 5-6 years ago, and I liked it then, and it kind of sparked my interest in watching more Ghibli, and revisiting it now. I still like it. I still think, you know, it's probably in a little bit of a lesser tier than, you know, some of the ones that will go through forward. You know, just because of, like, I know you're probably going to comment on it, but just how rushed it felt, like, story wise, like animation wise, it's beautiful. Like, it's so good. Like, the visuals are fantastic, but like you said, the story beats are kind of a little too quick at some points.
Yeah, no, you kind of touched on what I was going to get at there, and I think this is a great movie. I think that this is, I mean, for being made in 1984 and looking the way it does and telling a story the way it does, it's fantastic. I've touched on this multiple times throughout the show. It's just, this should have been a series. This should have been episodic and allowed for more growth. It felt like these characters are just harder to contain uh, in one film. And most of Miyazaki's films, they do a really good job of containing the characters in one film and giving you that growth that you feel that you need, all in that 2 hour period that you get them. This is not one of those. This is one that I'm gonna go and read the mangas now. I want to see what kind of growth that these
Yeah.
characters had uh, in the 12 years that and 7 volumes that the manga is, and kind of find out what kind of difference that you can do in that regard. But with that said, I think that this is a beautiful movie. I think that it is a jumping off point, and I'm really excited where things are going to go from here still.
I'm excited, and we as we wrap up, one of the things we talked about, and maybe by the time this is released, we won't even need to worry about. But thank you all so much for the support you've shown so far. Like we're recording this right after we released the pilot episode, and you know I love all the nice things that people have said, and like how excited it seems like everyone is for the series. And we said it before, but as soon as we get to like 100 subscribers on the YouTube channel, we're actually going to do a bonus episode of a non Miyazaki, non Studio Ghibli film, and that's going to be Akira. So even if you're listening through iTunes and stuff, go over to the YouTube channel and subscribe on there, so that we can get to 100, so that we can do Akira. And then later on, we've got another goal down the road, where Shane's actually going to pick a movie for me to watch.
Yeah, because I've watched a lot of anime. So and then we also asked, and yes, I mirror those thoughts. Thank you so much. I'm really happy about the response that we've seen from this podcast so far. But we garnered a few responses, and I reached out to some people about what they thought of Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. We're kind of given a viewer feedback kind of session as well.
Oh yeah.
I know that I've had a few people tell me that this is actually one of their favorites. And then Davi, an old coworker of mine, mentioned on my Facebook that Nausicaa doesn't get enough love, which I would very much agree with, being as it's kind of the forgotten Ghibli, being as it's not necessarily Ghibli.
I think, like I said, I think it's like I said, it's a lower tier, but that's by no means dashing its quality by any means, because a lower tier Studio Ghibli movie is still a lot better than most other studio movies.
Yes.
So,
I completely agree with that.
Just because it's not in the of the 25, if it would be ranked, when we do our final rankings, if say it's 12 or 15. That's not an indictment of this movie. That just shows you how good the movies ahead of it are.
Yeah, and then I think that's it for me. So next up, we are going to be hitting, the first actual Ghibli movie, and that would be Castle in the Sky.
Yeah, 1986's Castle in the Sky. I have not seen it.
I think I've seen it. I watched Castle in the Sky and Tales from Earthsea like back to back at one point, and I honestly think I remember Tales from Earthsea more, but I'll be interested to see how I react when I watch it, to see if maybe I've mixed a lot of the things from these two together. But I kept thinking, I was like, I swear that I'd seen this movie, and I think I might have. So I'll be interested to watch it again, or for the first time. I'll find out.
Yeah. So Shane, plug your other stuff.
Yeah. So you can listen to some episodes of Character Work. They're out and about. and also um, Fantasy Hangover. Both of those are on SoundCloud and Stitcher. And also the Knocked Out Entertainment website. No, they're not. I lied. They're just on
The stuff before you started the SoundCloud is still for character work. Is still up.
Okay, there's still some early stuff of character work on the Knocked Out website.
Yeah, I think I took down the Fantasy Hangover ones because they're so time sensitive.
Yeah.
Whereas you made character work be evergreen, so that's still up there. So
But yeah, so check those out. Yeah.
yeah, and then follow me kind of on everything at Knocked Out Films, and that'll have links to the YouTube and the Instagram, the Twitter, that whole thing. So make sure to like and subscribe on iTunes. We got a big bump on the iTunes one, and on the YouTube channel if that's where you prefer to watch and listen. So thanks.
Be good to each other.